Hello again YouTube, Pan here. And as you've almost certainly gathered from any weather forecast or just basically being alive for the last couple of weeks, you'll know that it's still stonkingly hot. And all I really have to say on the matter is, yeah, you know what? Everyone complains about the weather, but you know, how many of you are actually prepared to do a blood sacrifice to do something about it? Disclaimer, I do not advocate doing blood sacrifices. Or at the very least, if you're going to do that kind of thing, do your research first. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to go like sacrificing it to the wrong deity or something. That's just going to get everyone annoyed. Yeah, none of that is making it into the cut. So again, I've just switched off the air conditioning, so it's going to be a case of racing against the climbing temperature. And what have we got in the purse this time? It's a half-crown of William IV. Now, you will, hopefully, those of you who have been watching this channel for a while, recognise this coin as being the one that one of the ones that I picked up at the London Coin Fair a couple of months ago, and one of the ones that I in fact showed off on my video that I did with Backyard Bullion. And BYB kind of very tasked me with doing a video to talk a little bit more about William III, and what the history and the importance of this character is, and it's actually quite a good one. So first of all, the coin itself, I'm not going to lie, look at it. It genuinely is absolutely as smooth and shiny as it looks on the camera. There is pretty much nothing. There's maybe a Rex just about if you really strain your eye there. But there's not really any real markings on the reverse of this one, and the obverse as well is not particularly detailed. In fact, I would go so far as to say that you can't really tell very much at all about William and what he looks like from this particular portrait. So let's have a bit of a closer look at him from some other sources. And by other sources, I of course mean the Times Book of Kings and Queens. There we go. I'm suddenly just thinking of a spaniel with the the big floppy ears. So William is notable for a number of different reasons, not least of which being that he wasn't, strictly speaking, kind of meant to be king. He was what we would normally these days consider to be sort of a queen's consort. And so the way that works is, we have our monarch that's reigns because of inherited right, direct descendants down from Lord knows how many generations back. And then if they marry somebody, that somebody becomes consort. And that's exactly what happened with William III. He married Mary II. But at the time, Mary wasn't queen, and he certainly wasn't king. He was William of Orange, and Orange is a principality over in Holland. But what basically happened was that he was kind of over there during the reign of James II. James II was incredibly unpopular. The general feeling amongst sort of, the people in the places of influence was that he was secretly a papist. He was going to be a Catholic, and this was, well, really not very long after the whole, kind of Henry VIII split from the Catholic Church. So all that was kind of, still quite raw. We weren't very far removed from the point where we were literally burning each other at the stake over this stuff. Eventually, what they started doing was they started basically looking down the family trees and going, okay, who can we find who is directly related enough to our previous monarchies that we can get away with saying, yeah, okay, they can inherit the throne, but also B definitely isn't a Catholic. And so eventually they wound up with Mary. Mary's married to William, and so they started sending messages to William saying, hey, do you want to come over here and be king? Glossing over the fact that they had a king already. William didn't really believe it for quite a while, and when he eventually did come, what happened was a an extremely disappointing brief war. I'm just going to show you a map here. So William's forces came from the Netherlands, landed down in the West Country, got about as far as Exeter, briefly met a fraction of the King's forces, at which point the King's forces fled, the King with them, and then the King ran away to France. And if you're the King of England and you run away to France, you kind of know that you messed up, right? Entertainingly, whilst James II was actually in the process of fleeing to France, he was actually apprehended, sent back to London, and then fled again. Much to William's annoyance, because it was much more convenient for him if the king just fled, because then it's much easier for him to assume the throne and just sort of go, you know what, your king's run away. He's abandoned his responsibility. I guess I'll just have to take over here. What William absolutely refused to do was he absolutely refused to share power. He was not content with just being Queen's consort. He was absolutely determined that no, if you're going to have me over here, I'm going to be ruling in equal power with my wife. And actually, this suited Mary down to the ground. She had no interest in the actual affairs of state and being a monarch. So William III effectively became king, despite not really being next in line in the throne. He was related to the royal family because European nobility, everybody's related to everybody. And so this was known as the Glorious Revolution. It was the last time that we had an invading in inverted commas, force come to Great Britain and take power. It was also renowned for being essentially a more or less bloodless revolution. So, all well and good, all very lovely. Bloodless, however, isn't exactly a word that's commonly associated with William III. As I say before, there were the Jacobite rebellions, and these were put down quite brutally. He spent a good amount of his time and resources suppressing Ireland, again with a pretty much merciless intent. And he also is infamous in Scotland. And you may not know this from my accent, but I'm in fact Scottish, and let me tell you that William III is most famous to me as being the orchestrator of the Glencoe Massacre. Now, the Glencoe Massacre, for all you kind of hip young things who don't nerd out on history as much as I do, the Glencoe Massacre actually was cited by George R.R. Martin as being the inspiration behind the Red Wedding. So what William did was he demanded that all the clans in Scotland, particularly the Highland clans, which had a long tradition of essentially doing their own thing and screw you Jimmy, he demanded that all of the clans swear allegiance to it. Now, the MacDonalds, which were a clan that lived in Glencoe, their chieftain kind of held out on going and pledging allegiance to William, essentially because they just wanted to make sure, is James II going to come back maybe with a bunch of French soldiers and knock William out? Can we get away without doing this? And when it became clear that wasn't going to happen, he went off to go and swear allegiance. Unfortunately, he got caught out by the weather and basically couldn't make it. I get muddy on the details. He couldn't make it all the way to see the person he was meant to see, but he saw another local official, swore allegiance through them, and kind of did it. But this is kind of a bit like, you return you're giving your tax return a bit late, or it's essentially a mild administrative grey area. William was not pleased. He was so displeased that he essentially set out to wipe out the clan of MacDonald. And the way he did this is kind of classic divide and conquer. He got the MacDonald's historical enemy, the Campbells, a bunch of lowlanders, to go and visit and to stay with the MacDonalds under some pretext, and then after a few days with them, in the middle of the night, all the Campbell soldiers were to pull out their swords and murder everybody below the age of 70. They came from Fort William with murder in mind. that Campbell had ordered King William had signed. Put the moral to the sword, these words underlined, and leave out the light of MacDonald. So a bit of a bloodthirsty chap in a historical context. Now, what makes William III and the Glencoe Massacre particularly interesting is that it actually forms the basis of a really important legal principle that is still very, very relevant today, and that's the idea of culpability. So the Glencoe Massacre was essentially the influence for George R.R. Martin behind the Red Wedding in the Game of Thrones series. And particularly under Scottish law, there's murder, but then there's a much, much worse form of murder, which is murder under trust. Because the Campbells weren't an invading force, they were their house guests. They were, kind of sharing meals with these people. And so that was considered a really, really terrible crime. And this posed a really, really big problem when word of this massacre came out, because, well, what were Parliament and the people in charge and the justices supposed to do? Because this is a terrible crime, but it was ordered by the king. Well, you can't say that the king did this terrible thing. That would be bad. We can't possibly do that. Again, his signature was on the goddamn document. So it's from this incident that we start to get the precedent in English law of individual culpability. There was actually 2 soldiers amongst the Campbells who refused to obey these orders. They refused to do what they were told, and they actually deliberately broke their own swords so they couldn't then essentially go about killing people. And they were arrested and they were put under trial because they were doing a treasonous act by disobeying orders. And eventually, fortunately for them, they were exonerated because the only way out of this legal quandary was essentially to conclude that the responsibility lay on the individual. So if the individual was given an order that was unlawful or immoral, that the burden was on them not to carry it out. And that is a situation, and that is an argument, that is a precedent that we see echoed throughout recent history. So, William III, William of Orange, the glorious bloodless revolution, and the architect of the most infamous massacre in UK history, at least on our own mainland. I was going to say that if you like this video, then to click the thumbs up symbol beneath it, but actually I don't particularly care if you like this video. Good, I hope you like it. If you want to leave a comment, please do. I really enjoy discussing these things with you guys. In the meantime, I will see you hopefully next Friday, assuming I get a video up in time for then, because I might possibly be spending the next week in a field, so that could be interesting. Alright, bye for now.